is waiting. Do I have to refresh
Yeah.
again? Okay,
Refresh.
Wait till I can get back on there again. Okay. Wait, something went wrong.
Okay. Yeah, we're good? Can hear? Okay, so I guess we're good now. All right, welcome. We're back this week with Free Grace Community Church. We missed last week's, but so we didn't miss anything. We're going to continue on from Acts 21 where we left off. We were away last week due to a family emergency, which I'm not going to go into the details here, but it's very relevant to the Bible when things happen in your life to go, and I'm just going to look at Romans 8. And I might say everyone's okay from what happened last week. Could have been worse. So it says in Romans 8:28, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. So he uses everything to further his plan. So nothing happens without a reason, is what it says. And in James 4, there's a warning to us in James 4. It says, go to now, ye that say today or tomorrow we will go into such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain, whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. So it's basically saying that we don't make our own plans. God may have his own plans that will interfere with our plans, but everything will work together for the good of everything in the end, for those of us who are saved. So so there was no new playlists added this week. We still have the same playlists. There is one important series of documentary that I do recommend now, because I've just been watching them, and I've just finished, or I'm just in the middle of Third Adam number 4. But Spencer Smith has a series of documentaries called Third Adam. So Third Adam 1 is this one. Third Adam 2, The Great Seduction. Third Adam 3, The Rise of the Divine Feminine. And then these two are optional. Third Adam 4, The Road to Shambhala. That's the one I'm in the middle of right now. Now that's a 4-hour documentary, but it's very important to watch it because it shows you exactly what's going on today in the so-called evangelical church, most of which is a false church. And he blows the lid off of what's really going on and ties it into the Mystery Babylon religion that is mentioned in the Bible in Revelation 17 and 18 with Mystery Babylon. So I will put this playlist in mind, but I'll put a link to this playlist down below in the video links later on. So definitely recommend this. There is only one warning about the ending of Third Adam, the first one. He has a gospel presentation in the back or at the end, and it is a lordship salvation false gospel that he's preaching. He doesn't do it in the other ones, but at that moment in time, 5 years ago, he used to backload the gospel with works by saying, if you're saved, then you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that, you're automatically gonna, hate sin and love God, those type of things, which is totally false. So just stop watching it before he gives you the gospel, basically, because it's a false gospel. So he probably realized that he was doing it. So he stopped doing it since then. I haven't heard him backloading works into salvation ever since, like a few years ago. But anyway, I would recommend that. It's an important series to watch. You can just watch a little bit at a time, and you'll get through it. So now we're going to do our Bible numerics this week. Last week we did the Jesus plus Christ 777 plus 777 mentions or appearances of Jesus So if you add those up and divide by 2, you get 777 plus 777. That's the total. And so now we're going to continue with Moses plus Jesus plus Christ. So if you search, first of all, if you search the phrase man of God, that phrase is mentioned 77 times in the verse text of the King James Bible. So if you just do the Old Testament and the New Testament, you get 77 occurrences of man of God. And the first of those 77 mentions is referring to Moses, who is mentioned 77 times in the New Testament. The first mention of Moses is the 77th word of the chapter that he's mentioned in the New Testament, in Matthew 8. The 77th word of Matthew 8 is Moses. So, and the first of the mentions of man of God is Moses, and this is the blessing wherewith Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. So that's the first occurrence. And then, besides the 77 New Testament mentions, there are 770 appearances of Moses, with an asterisk too, because sometimes it's possessive, in the rest of the verse text in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So then he just gives you how you would do those searches yourself. It's fairly simple. In the pure Bible search, King James Bible search. The 77th mention of man of God is about the perfect man of God. Number 7 is the number of perfection, whose life is fully revolved around the scriptures. Now that would be 2 Timothy 3:16. All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. When it means perfect, it means complete. And 7 is the number of completion. In other words, the Bible gives you everything that you need for all good works. The 777th mention of Moses, the man of God, is in John 1:17, which gives us basically a summary of the entire Bible in that one verse. The 777th mention of Moses, for the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. Old Testament is when the law was given. Grace and truth came by Jesus Christ in the New Testament. So it's basically summarizing the entire Bible in one verse. If you could do it in one verse, that's it. So as seen in the previous note, there are 777 plus 777 appearances of Jesus plus Christ in the Bible. That was the one we did the last time. If you add all appearances of Moses to that equation, you get a grand total of 7 times 7 times 7 times 7 appearances. So if you just add up those appearances, it comes up to 2401, which is 7 times 7 times 7 times 7. So that, and on top of all that, Moses in John 1:17 is not only the 777th mention of Moses, it is also the exact middle appearance, 1201 out of 2401 of the total search, Moses plus Jesus plus Christ in the entire Bible. And then this is just the cover page, I think, or the title page of the original 1611 King James Bible, or the title page of a 1645 King James Bible, printed at Cambridge, with John 1:17 featured at the top of the illustration, representing the entire Bible. So just up here, if you look right up here, it says John chapter 1 verse 17, the law was given by Moses and grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. So apparently whoever was behind doing this page agrees that that one verse is basically a summary of the entire Old and New Testament. So that is the Bible numerics for today. Next week we'll get on to note number 11. So now we're going to continue in the book of Acts, and we stopped at Acts 21:16, where basically Paul had returned from his third missionary journey back to Caesarea and back to Antioch and Caesarea, I guess. But then they were all like warning him not to go. They all warned him not to go to Jerusalem because he wanted to go to Jerusalem. Everyone's warning him. God sends a prophet to warn him not to go. And he says, I'm going anyway. I'm ready to die. So they went anyway. And this is one of those passages where it says, we took up our carriages. So Luke himself was with him at the time. And Luke, was one of the ones trying to tell him not to go as well. So picking up with verse 17 of Acts 21, we have, and when we were come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. And the day following, Paul went in with us unto James, and all the elders were present. That's the elders in the church. James was like the head of the church at the time. And when he had Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs. What is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. Do therefore this that we say to thee. We have 4 men which have a vow on them. Them take and purify thyself with them, and be at charges with them, that they may shave their heads, and all may know that those things whereof they were informed concerning thee are nothing, but that thou thyself also walkest orderly and keepest the law. As touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and concluded that they observe no such thing, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, and from blood, and from strangled, and from fornication. Then Paul took the men, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification, until that an offering should be offered for every one of them. So they're saying, Paul, you better go with these Jews. There's some Jews that have to go to the temple. We want you to go with them to show them that you're not against the law, because they were accusing Paul of saying you don't have to keep the law. We're under grace. You don't keep the law, right? In other words, they think that like Paul was completely saying that you should just go out and sin as much as you want, basically. So they're saying, like, Paul forsook the law, right? So he's basically going there now to try and appease the Jews, to show them, though, that he will still do the customs of the temple in order to, fulfill the law with the vows and all this. They have vows and stuff. So then he just did that to do that. And he paid for those 4 guys as well when they entered the temple. I guess for the offerings that they had. So that's what's going on there. The church is like trying to like make everyone like, they don't want a division in the church between the Jews and the Gentiles, right? So they were saying the Jews still do these things, the Gentiles don't have to do it, but they want Paul to show the Jews that he's not against what they're doing, right? He's okay with doing ceremonial things in the temple, right? And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when they saw him in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him, crying out, Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law in this place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple, and hath polluted this holy place. For they had seen before with him in the city Trophimus, an Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. So they're making some assumptions here. They're saying that Paul teaches against the law. Paul teaches against the temple. And they're accusing him of bringing a Gentile into the temple to pollute it, right? Because only Jews are supposed to enter the temple. But this is a false accusation. He never did that. But they're saying they suppose that he did it. They assume that he did it because he had this guy with him, Trophimus. But he never did. He never took him into the temple. And all the city was moved, and the people ran together, and they took Paul and drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut. And as they went about to kill him, tidings came unto the chief captain of the band that all Jerusalem was in an uproar, who immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them. And when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left beating of Paul. So they were beating him. Then the chief captain came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains, and demanded who he was and what he had done. And some cried one thing, some another, among the multitude. And when he could not know the certainty for the tumult, he commanded him to be carried into the castle. And when he came upon the stairs, so it was that he was borne of the soldiers for the violence of the people. For the multitude of the people followed after, crying, Away with him! And as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? Art not thou that Egyptian, which before these days madest an uproar, and leddest out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers? So the chief captain was saying, Are you that guy? Did you let 4,000 people go? No. But that's another false accusation. Or maybe the chief captain was saying, is that the guy? Because there was this uproar with that other. Acts 22, men. So this is what he's saying to them. Men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you. And when they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence. And he saith, I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God, as ye all are this day. So he's defending himself because they had accused him of teaching against the law. So now he's, giving them his credentials that he taught according to the law. And I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women. And as also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders, from whom I also received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them which were bound, there bound unto Jerusalem, for to be punished. And it came to pass that as I made my journey, and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. And I fell unto the ground, and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. So then you get a little bit more detail of what happened there, because this is what happened in Acts 9, I think. So it's another recap. And anytime they do recaps in the Bible, it's one of the purposes of doing that is to highlight that it's an important passage, right? It's an important story, I guess. And so, and it says, so now we knew that there was people with him, and they saw the light, but they didn't see Jesus. They didn't hear the voice, right? They did not hear his voice. Only Paul did. Verse 10, and I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, Arise and go into Damascus, and there it shall be told thee of all things which are appointed for thee to do. And when I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came into Damascus. And one Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there, came unto me and stood and said unto me, Brother Saul, receive thy sight. And the same hour I looked up upon him. And he said, The God of our fathers hath chosen thee, that thou shouldest know his will, and see that just one, and shouldest hear the voice of his mouth. For thou shalt be his witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. And now why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized, and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. And it came to pass that, when I was come again to Jerusalem, even while I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance, and saw him saying unto me, Make haste and get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, for they will not receive thy testimony concerning me. And I said, Lord, they know that I imprisoned and beat in every synagogue them that believed on thee. And when the blood of thy martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by and consenting unto his death, and kept the raiment of them that slew him. And he said unto me, Depart, for I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. And they gave him audience unto this word, then lifted up their voices and said, Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. So now his story's over. They're still calling for his death. And as they cried out and cast off their clothes and threw dust into the air, the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle and bade that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. So they're going to they want to whip him, basically torture to get a confession out of him, I think. So the castle that they're bringing him into is the Roman fort that they had there in Jerusalem when the Romans were there, when the Romans had taken over. In fact, I think it's part of that castle still exists today. And the Jews call it the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, part of the temple. But since we know the temple was completely destroyed, because Jesus said it was going to be destroyed, that wall that's still there, that they go and pray at, is actually the wall of that Roman fort, which they call the castle here. That's what I believe it is. So that's the castle. It's nearby to the Temple Mount, I think. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? He said, Yea. And the chief captain answered, With a great sum obtained I this freedom. And Paul said, But I was freeborn. Then straightway they departed from him which should have examined him. And the chief captain also was afraid, after that he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him. On the morrow, because he would have known the certainty wherefore he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him from his bands, and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. So now he's going to appear before this council. So this whole thing about declaring that you're a Roman, back in the day, so we have, what is a freeborn citizen or a freedman, right? So there's differences in status here. This chief captain said, with a great sum obtained I this freedom. So that guy was a slave, the chief captain, who earned enough money to buy his freedom. But Paul said he was freeborn, which means he was born free. He was never a slave, right? So in the Roman Empire, there's two different statuses here of free people. You've got the freeborn citizen, right, which had a legal status of full Roman citizen from birth, and a freed slave, which was that chief captain. He became a citizen upon formal manumission, but with restrictions. So a freeborn citizen could vote, stand for election, and hold public office. The freed slaves could vote, but they cannot run for public office. So that's one difference. The social standing of those two, the freeborn citizen could occupy the traditional social classes of patrician, equestrian, or plebeian, and look down upon freed men. So the freed men were looked down on as a separate social class, often part of the lower class plebeians who faced social prejudice despite wealth. So even if the guy was wealthy, they didn't like the fact that he used to be a slave. So that was a stigma for the rest of their life, right? They didn't have all the same rights. Obligations could enter into voluntary patron-client relationships, whereas automatically, so now when the freed slave were freed, he automatically became a client of their former master, owing them respect, services, and political support. So while they could vote, they had to vote for their previous master or whoever that guy wanted him to vote for. And they still had to do services for them. So they weren't fully free, right? They were still they had to work for that guy still. They were still working for the person who they used to be a slave for. And the children's statuses, children were freeborn citizens with no restrictions, and if the freed man had children, they were born free as well and had full rights, allowing the family to fully integrate into society in the next generation. So that guy, the chief captain's kids, would be full free citizens, right? The same status as Paul would have been. So in essence, a freeborn citizen, even a poor one, had certain legal protections and an inherent dignity, such as immunity from being beaten in public, that a freed man did not fully possess. The social hierarchy was rigid, and having a family history free of slavery was a source of pride and a key social distinction. So that means Paul was of a higher class than most Romans. Like a lot of these Roman captains and stuff, they were all freed slaves, a lot of them. But Paul was freeborn, so he's like, they're like, whoa, this guy is a high class guy, so we can't just have him scourged because he has immunity against that stuff. So there's certain procedures they have to go through if Paul says he's a freeborn Roman citizen. So that's why they said, okay, we'll put him before the council, because he did have that status. But I mean, I don't know how they proved it. Like there was no like databases and stuff like that. Just because you say it is, they accepted it, I guess. I don't know how he proved that he was freeborn, but in any case, they accepted it. So chapter 23, and Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. So that's the high priest of the temple. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall, for sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? So, because he has immunity against being struck in public like that. That's against Roman law. So he's calling him a whited wall. This is similar to, if you go to Matthew 23, where do I get my notes here? Click on this. Matthew 23, verse 27. Apparently he's a Pharisee, probably. But Matthew 23:27, Jesus said, Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones, and of all uncleanness. Even so also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. So Jesus himself called the Pharisees, like, you look good on the outside, but we know that you're bad people on the inside. So that's why he's calling them a whited wall. It's right after what Jesus called them, the same. And then it says, and they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. So that note here, when you see I wist not, this means I did not know. Wist is like an old English archaic term that we don't use anymore, but I wist not means I did not know. So Paul didn't know he was the high priest after he called him thou whited wall. So he wouldn't have called him that if he knew he was the high priest, because Paul has respect for the authority that God has put in place, right? Which goes, if you go to Romans, is it 13? Yeah. Romans 13, it says, Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Not in terms of salvation, but you'll get punished, I guess, in this world. So that's why Paul would not have spoken against them, because whoever's in place in rulerships, even if they're like tyrannical rulers, it doesn't matter, because God has put them there for a reason, because it carries out God's plan to have certain people ruling over the government, like in charge of the governments. And really most of, like in terms of Romans 13, it says mostly governments are supposed to be going after evildoers. It says, "For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil." So the purpose of a government is to go after evildoers, not go after law-abiding citizens. But even so, the rulers are put there by God for a reason. So that's why Paul was still respectful to that, even though this guy was not a good guy, the high priest. But when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead I am called in question." And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. So Paul saw that there's two factions here. He's setting them against each other because he knows that one of them believes in the resurrection and the other one doesn't. So he's like stirring up dissension. Paul's like, getting them to fight against each other, basically. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, "We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel hath spoken to him, let us not fight against God." And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain bare witness also at Rome. So Jesus appeared to him there in his room. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. And they were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. So now there's a bunch of guys. So now they're we're gonna starve ourselves unless we can kill Paul. That's it. We'll rather die if Paul doesn't, basically. And they are more than 40. Okay, and they came to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a great curse, that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now therefore ye with the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though ye would inquire something more perfectly concerning him. And we, or ever he come near, are ready to kill him." And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. So Paul has a nephew. This is the first we've ever heard of this, and the last we'll ever hear of it. It's only the only place in the Bible where we find out that Paul had a sister and a nephew. So his nephew's coming in and tell them what they're saying outside, that they're planning to kill him. Then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, "Bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath a certain thing to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, "Paul the prisoner called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who has something to say unto thee." Then the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him aside privately and asked him, What is that thou hast to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldest bring down Paul tomorrow into the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. But do not thou yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath, that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him, and now they are ready, looking for a promise from thee." So the chief captain then let the young man depart, and charged him, "See thou tell no man that thou hast showed these things to me." And he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, "Make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70, so that'd be 70, and spearmen 200 at the 3rd hour of the night. And provide them beasts, that they may set Paul on, and bring him safe unto Felix the governor." And he wrote a letter after this manner: "Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent governor Felix, sendeth greeting. This man was taken of the Jews, and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army, and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth into their council, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. And when it was told me how the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to his accusers also to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. So that's the letter he wrote. And then the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. Now, Antipatris is on the map here. So they're in Jerusalem. They're going up the coast to Antipatris, which is here. And there is a castle there, too. That's the ruins of the Antipatris, the castle that they have there. So on the morrow they left the horsemen to go with him and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. And when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was, and when he understood that he was of Cilicia, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. So this now is Felix the governor, who was in charge. This castle is like Herod, one of the Herod castles. So the lineage of Herod. Let's see. Okay, let's go to the next one. We're just going to cover Acts 24, and I will end at the end of Acts 24 for today, because then we have 4 more chapters after that for next time. So, chapter 24. And after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders, and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Notwithstanding, that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of thy clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition amongst all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. It's a false accusation, by the way. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take a knowledge of all these things, whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. Then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered, Forasmuch as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because that thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship, and they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues, nor in the city, neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me. But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. And herein do I exercise myself, to have always a conscience void to offense toward God and toward men. Now after many years I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult, who ought to have been here before thee and object if they had aught against me. Or else, let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me while I stood before the council, except it be for this one voice that I cried standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day. And when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, he deferred them and said, When Lysias the chief captain shall come down, I will know the uttermost of your matter. So he's saying now the chief captain needs to come and testify, right? So now we're not going to go forward until that happens. And he commanded a centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and that he should forbid none of his acquaintance to minister or come unto him. So now they're going to keep Paul there, but he's allowed to have a certain amount of freedom inside the castle, I guess, and people can come visit him. And after certain days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, which was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. And as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, Go thy way for this time. When I have a convenient season, I will call for thee. He hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him. Wherefore he sent for him the oftener, and communed with him. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus came unto Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. So Paul was there for 2 years. Felix wanted to get a bribe. That's what this is about. He hoped that money should have been given him of Paul to let him go, right? So he was hoping that the chief captain or those Jews or whatever that were accusing him would come and give him a bribe to let Paul go. So he's going to keep Paul until he gets that bribe. But now we have Porcius Festus coming, and he's another Roman authority figure. He's coming in. So we'll get next time we'll see more about Porcius Festus, which is like a funny name for us, but was his name, Porcius Festus. Yeah, they had different names back then. So now we have the notes that are from the Knowing the Bible series from Crossway for week 11. We're only going to look at half of these notes that ends in Rome. So eventually he's going to get to Rome. Right now he's not. He's in Caesarea. Preaching the good news of the gospel with all boldness wherever he goes and to whomever he meets, from soldiers, sailors, and unreached tribes to governors and kings. Luke ends his account on a note of triumph, showing Paul in the capital, spoiler alert, in the capital of the world as he preaches the gospel without hindrance to all who will hear it. The big picture in Acts 21, 17 to 28 and 31. Paul preaches the gospel without that's in the whole up until 28. Without hindrance, as the Lord uses him in his arrest to bring the gospel to Rome. So Paul's visit with James in Acts 21, 17 to 26 is another episode in the continuing struggle for many Jews to comprehend the spread of the gospel to the Gentiles. The word about Jesus scandalizes many Jews because it grafts Gentiles into the people of God without requiring them to abide by the law. We see Paul struggle with this issue throughout his letters, most especially in Galatians. So if we look at Galatians 2, Galatians chapter 2, it is 15 and 16. So it says, We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ that we might be justified by the faith of Jesus Christ and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. And then 19 and 21. For I through the law am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. In the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. So he will often preach against keeping the law in his letters. So Galatians 3 says, O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you, that ye should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ hath been evidently sent forth, crucified among you? This only would I learn of you. Receive ye the Spirit by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith? Are ye so foolish? Having begun in the Spirit, are you now made perfect by the flesh? So he's rebuking them because they even though they're saved, they think that works are required to prove that you're saved. So he's saying, you have the Spirit. So what's the point of trying to perfect the flesh? The flesh is not going to heaven. Our bodies are going to stay here, right? When the rapture occurs, we get new bodies, brand new bodies, glorified bodies. So the doing works to, live a good life or whatever, it's vain because the flesh isn't going to heaven. So why are you trying to perfect the flesh? That's what Paul was rebuking them about. Paul is unyielding about his obligation to spread the gospel to the Gentiles and about their not having to keep the law, because by the law is no flesh justified. So he will not, bend or bow to the Jews who say you got to tell people to keep the law. He's not going to do that. We also see Paul doing all he can to demonstrate to the Jews that he values the law and its use for Jews, even undergoing rites of purification. He encourages others to be flexible in non-essentials for the sake of harmony and humility in the church. See Romans 14. So he will do some things just so that they won't get upset at him, right? So for this example in Romans 14 is about, for one believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. Let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not, and let not him which eateth not judges him that eateth, because it's talking about the food laws of the Jews. Some people think you have to follow the food laws, or you don't want to eat certain things. Other people say you can eat anything you want. No, in the New Testament, there is no food laws, but some people think that they still need to do it, and it's not, as long as they're not doing it because I think their salvation depends on it, then it's fine. You can anyone can do it. Like, we have freedom to decide whether or not you want to do that or not, as long as you're not tying it into salvation, right? Because that's the problem with some of these churches out there, like say the Seventh-day Adventist church. We went to a Seventh-day Adventist church one time for a while, for a few weeks or a couple months or whatever. And the first time we got there, they're like, yeah, we keep the feasts. They keep all the biblical feasts, right? They celebrate them, 7 feasts. But initially it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. Like, I guess if they want to keep the feast, they can, right? But later on, after we were there a while, we came to learn that they don't do it just because it's voluntary. They think that their salvation depends on keeping not just the feasts, but the entire law. So and they even travel to like the Feast of Tabernacles, and like everyone's like, oh, you coming to the Feast of Tabernacles this year? And it's like each year it's in some resort in the U.S. It's not in Jerusalem where you build a little tent. No. That's how they think they're keeping the law, by going to some big resort in Colorado or something, and having buffets and all this, right? So, I mean, that's their idea of keeping the law. That is not keeping the law. I'm telling them right now. But they were not keeping the law. They're like the Pharisees, where they think they're keeping the law, but they are not. They are not keeping the law. Nobody can keep the law. So, in any case, if it's not tied to salvation, you could keep the feasts if you want. You can celebrate them if you want. Just that it's not it has nothing to do with salvation at all. It's not necessary, right? So you could just go on with your life and never do the feasts or never keep the food laws, and it's fine, right? It has nothing to do with salvation. That's what Romans 14 is about, and that's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 19 to 23 about becoming all things to all people. So 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 23. For though I be free from all men, yet I have made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. And unto Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without the law, as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. And this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker thereof with you. So he's saying that he's going to participate in some of those customs, even with people who think it has something to do with their salvation, just so that he can get in there and preach the true gospel to them and perhaps change their mind and get them, and they will become saved, and then they'll learn that they don't have to be doing those things to be saved, right? So that's about becoming all things to all people. Some people take that verse and say, well, that Paul says you could live any way you want because you're all things to all people. So you should go and hang out with the New Agers, or you can go to parties with people and do all these things. But I mean, it doesn't go to that extent of being all things to all people, but then sinning going out and sinning. You got to draw the line there, right? You can't be doing that, right? Because God's going to chastise you if you participate in certain evil things that people do, right? So, but to some extent, he would go along with some of their customs just so that they won't be angry with him, and so they would be open to hearing the gospel. So that's why he underwent the rites of purification. It allows for adaptation of non-essentials. In other words, it has nothing to do with salvation, for the sake of mission, without compromising the gospel or his identity in Christ. So he knows that it has nothing to do with salvation. He's just doing it so that they're open to him, right? Because at some point he's going to proclaim the gospel to them. Paul is convinced that God has called him to proclaim the gospel to all, despite the rejection he suffers. Read Luke 12, 51 to 53. Let's see what that says. It's only 3 verses. 51. Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth? I tell you, nay, but rather division. This is Jesus talking. For from henceforth there shall be 5 in one house divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. The father shall be divided against the son, and the son against the father. The mother against the daughter, and the daughter against the mother. The mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Jesus did not come to bring unity to everybody. He came to bring division, because the gospel does not bring unity. It divides. It discerns who's believing the right thing and who's not believing the correct thing. And the people who are not believing the right thing, if they reject the gospel, then there's going to be division, right? So God is not a unifier of everyone. Satan is actually the great unifier. If you watch the Third Adam series, you'll see how Satan's always trying to bring everybody together, like at the Tower of Babel, where they all wanted to come together. The gospel, on the other hand, God divides people. He divided all the nations and made all the different languages to divide people so they wouldn't come together. So God is a divider, not a unifier, as some people might say, because there's this ecumenical movement where they want to all come together, like all the Catholics, the Mormons, all into one, basically, and say, we'll put aside all of our differences and come together as one. This is leading to a new world religion, a new age religion, because all of these false religions wanting to get together, they actually believe their religion is the same as the mystery Babylon religion. Like if you read, first a Third Adam series for more details, because it shows you without question of a doubt what is going on today. So how is Paul living out the persecution that Jesus promised would come to some of his followers when he foresaw that families would be bitterly divided on account of his kingdom? Well, Paul knows he's going to be persecuted for the gospel, but he's preaching it. He's preaching it anyway. He knows it. The Jews attack Paul in Acts 21 and distort both what he said and what he did. How did they distort what Paul had to say? Well, they were making false accusations. While the text doesn't always tell us the reasoning for accusations and attacks of others, what does the text say is the reason for the Jews' accusations here? So Acts 21, 27 to 36. Let me just take a look. Stirred up all the people. They're basically because they say he was against the law, right? So that's what it's basically. They think he's preaching against the law and against the temple. In Acts 22, Paul has another opportunity to preach the gospel before a Jewish crowd, although he is interrupted before he can finish. What is the result of Paul's declarations of his call to go to the Gentiles, then that God is concerned about them? Let's see. Well, he was telling them the story of what he's supposed to go to the Gentiles, right? So, and then they interrupted him, and he didn't get to finish his story, right? So basically, that upset them because he's again. He's provoking them to anger. So this is the thing. This is why they're getting all upset. The Jews treasured their status as God's chosen people and found it difficult to accept that God was grafting in those from outside their race. And by the way, being a Jew is not actually a race. It's a religion. Read Romans 11 to 24. How does this shed light? So yeah, this is the one where it says, about has God cast away his people? God forbid. Okay, so God has not cast away Israel. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. But rather through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles for to provoke them to jealousy. So God wants to provoke the Jews to jealousy that the Gentiles are now grafted in. So that's why they're getting upset. They're being provoked to jealousy on purpose so that eventually they'll come back to God and they'll finally accept Jesus Christ as their Savior. This may take 2,000, it's taken 2,000 years already, but that's the reason. So in Acts 23, Jesus appears to Paul and encourages him to take courage. What does Jesus promise him? Yeah, so he says you have to go to Rome. He's telling him he has to go to Rome and preach the word there, which is, at the end of his commission in Acts 1:8, where he says you'll take the word to the whole world, basically. And then we have respect for God's rule. Even when that office was held by a bad man, Saul, David intentionally avoided harming the Lord's anointed, even as Saul repeatedly attempted to kill him. Obedience to God is seen as in respect for his leaders, while resistance to God often manifests itself in resentment of them. Joseph's brothers despised him when he told them of God's plan to exalt him. The Psalms equate rebellion against God's anointed with rebellion against him. So Jesus, as God's true anointed one, was despised and executed because the people rejected his office. So we're not supposed to go against the government, basically. That's why we're not supposed to get involved in government at all, whatsoever. It's not our kingdom. It's not like God's kingdom is not the world, right? We're not to be involved in government. So it's best to stay out of politics, really, as a Christian, because because God puts those leaders there to bring about his plan, even though it looks like they're tyrannical sometimes, which they have to be, because how else would the plan come about, right? At some point, we need an antichrist to come, and the whole world is going to be against us, and it's part of God's plan. So, and then we have antinomianism. This is the last note. The grace of the gospel frequently leads to the charge of antinomianism or lawlessness, that if grace is free, people will feel free to sin all they want. The first to levy such charges are, as here, those who are zealous to keep and compel religious commands. Paul goes to great lengths to satisfy the Jerusalem accusers, even accommodating James by submitting to a ritual Mosaic cleansing. Paul's opponents believed that people would try to keep God's commands only out of fear of punishment, and if that fear was removed, there would no longer be any motivation to live a righteous life. Into this situation comes news of the gospel, in which Jesus has removed the fear of punishment and freely reconciled us to God. Those zealous for the law can see only the potential danger. If Christians do not fear punishment, they will do whatever they want. The book of Acts refutes such accusations, compared with Romans 6. Romans 6 says, "Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid." So Paul says, no, you can't go out and sin all you want, even though we're not under the law, showing that those who have experienced grace are motivated by remembering God's grace. Because of God's great love for them, they do whatever he wants. They are compelled by the love of Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:14. For the love of Christ constraineth us, because we thus judge that if one died for all, then we're all dead, and that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him which died for them and rose again. So, we're not supposed to live any way we want. That's the thing. People always accuse free grace of saying, oh, you can just live any way you want, because you're not under the law, so you can do anything you want. The problem with that is there's still consequences for sin. So you will not be able to do anything you want. And in fact, if you're saved, God is going to chastise you if you do try to live any way you want. So there's a call to not do that, to try and you have to yield to the Spirit so that you won't fulfill the lusts of the flesh. So we have the ability to do that, but we have to yield to the Spirit, right? It's not automatic. And we're not supposed to live any way we want. That's a false accusation that they always make. It's called a straw man accusation because it's not true. That they always accuse. People who don't believe the right gospel will accuse someone of preaching against the law, saying, you think you could live any way you want. And they think that they have to keep the law for salvation, whereas we know we don't keep the law for salvation. It has nothing to do with salvation. Keeping the law is not required after you're saved. The only reason for the law is that it's a schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ. It's only there to show you that you need a Savior, that you can't keep the law by yourself. So that's the purpose of the actual law. It's not a list of things that you're supposed to do or not do this, do that, because if you break one of those laws, you've broken the entire law. So everyone is in law, continually, because it says even the thought of foolishness is sin, right? So if you even think a foolish thought, you've broken the entire law and you're guilty. So what's the point of trying to keep the law to perfect the flesh, as Paul says? The flesh is not going to heaven. So there's no strive. You don't need to be striving to keep the law. What we need to be doing is resting in what Christ has done for us and yielding to his Spirit that is in us, and then it will guide you into all truth. So basically that's the end of today. We're now at the end. So we have 4 more chapters to go. Next week we'll finish off the book of Acts. So thanks for watching, and remember, go check out the Third Adam documentaries. I highly recommend it. It's important to watch these, I think. But and chip away at it if you have to, but just do it. I hope people watch it. So and watch it and compare everything what Spencer says against the Bible, as we're supposed to. Don't just blindly accept what he's saying. But he's correct on a lot of things here. So anyway, in any case, I guess we'll end the live stream here. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. And we will be back again next week.